Okay, so thank everybody for joining us today on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. I would like to introduce you to Abby Distelberger, who is representing the Levine Speaker Series. Abby is a longtime Federation person, including being a past president. And here she is. Abby?
Thank you. So good afternoon and welcome everybody. And I'm just so happy that you were able to join us for the first of 3 of the Levine Family Speaker Series in Ignite Your Soul. And the Jewish Federation is just so grateful for the generosity of the Levine family for funding this program, as we're able to bring in really dynamic, inspirational, and transformative speakers to our community that we could not have budgeted for with our campaign dollars. And before I introduce our speaker, as some of you know, you might actually know of Rabbi Cella. Once again, if you haven't done so already, please mute yourselves. Rabbi Cella will speak for about an hour. And after, if you have any questions, please write them in the chat. After she's done speaking, I will go through the chat and I will ask those questions to her. And once again, the session is being recorded and the link to it will be sent out after we are done. So just to give you a little bit of a background, for those of you who do not know Rabbi Cella, Rabbi Margie Cella grew up on Long Island and she was raised in a Protestant home. After college, she married her husband, Raymond, who was raised in a Roman Catholic family. Together, they traveled a tumultuous path that ultimately led to their conversion, as well at the time then with 2 young children. They had a daughter and a son. And she enjoyed a 30-year career as a high school math teacher. And at the same time, she was becoming very involved with synagogue activities. So upon her retirement from teaching, she applied to the rabbinical school at the Jewish Theological Seminary in Manhattan. And she completed the program and was ordained in May of 2019. Rabbi Cella still lives on Long Island with her husband, and they have 6 grandchildren now. And currently she is working as an educator for the Women's League for Conservative Judaism. Rabbi Cella coincidentally served as an interim part-time rabbi, along with Rabbi Moshe Edelman, right here in Orange County, a congregation of Agudas Israel. And that was from August of 2018 through June of 2019. And at this time, she's currently writing 2 books. One book is a year of her daily Torah commentaries, one on each aliyah of every parsha that was written during the pandemic. She started writing this in March of 2020, and it went through February of 2021. And not only is it an explanation of the Torah portions, but it's also a reflection of the time in which it is written. And the working title is Hindsight is 2020. Torah from Turbulent Times. I just think that's so catchy. And the other book is an autobiographical account of her journey from a Christian upbringing to conversion to Judaism, along with her husband and then 2 young children, and ultimately to studying in the rabbinical school of the Jewish Theological Seminary, and culminating in her ordination 2019. And the working title for that is I Never Really Did Like Kool-Aid, my 50-year journey from Jesus to the rabbinate. So at this point, I would like to introduce our speaker, hand it over to Rabbi Cella. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Abby, and thank you very much for inviting me to come and speak this afternoon. This is a story that I have told many, many times over the last, I guess, 40 years. I've told it in many places in the world, in many various settings in the world. I've told it in many times in English, and even a couple of times in Hebrew, which was a challenge, but I did do that. It is a story that is both cautionary and inspirational. So as I go through, especially if you've never heard the story before, you most likely will have some questions along the way. So please, as the questions occur to you, write them in the chat, because if you wait until the end, then you're going to forget what they are. Write them in the chat, and then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. Okay, so I said that this is my 50-year journey. I peg that 50 years from like the beginning of my teenage years. So let me back it up a little bit and just tell you, I was born in 1953. And when I was born, my parents were living in Queens. But when I was 3 weeks old, they moved out to Long Island. So if you know the geography of Long Island, it's very long and looks like a fish. And there are two counties. The one which is closest to Queens is Nassau County. And the one which is further out on the east end of Long Island, which is where I live now, is Suffolk County. So my parents moved to a town called Massapequa when I was born. And those of you who are in the New York area probably recognize the fact that a lot of towns on Long Island and in New York have Native American originations of their names. So the town that I grew up in is a town called Massapequa. The Massapequa, it has two claims to fame. We are well known for two celebrities who came from Massapequa. One is Alec Baldwin, and one is Jerry Seinfeld. So I do not know, or I never met either one of them, but those are the two famous people who came from Massapequa. It's in Nassau County. It's about 2 towns away from the famous Levittown, to which so many people moved out after as a result of the GI Bill, which allowed young married families with veterans to purchase houses with low interest mortgages in the wake of World War II. My father was one of those who took advantage of that, and that's where they moved to Massapequa, a largely, probably about 99% white middle class area. The pejorative nickname for the town at the time was Matzah Pizza. And the reason for that was that approximately 50% of the people in the town were Jews, and approximately 50% of the town were of Italian extraction. And so my family was neither. We were part of the small percentage that was neither of those. And my family could really be described as waspish. My father was of German extraction. He was born in Germany, came here when he was a little boy. So naturally, a big part of our life growing up was going to church. My parents were very, very, very much involved in their church. My mother joined all kinds of women's organizations in the church. My father joined men's organizations. My father was an usher. My father was in the church choir for a while before they politely suggested to him that perhaps he wanted to spend his time ushering instead of trying to be in the choir. Unfortunately, I have inherited his singing abilities. But so church was a big part of our lives. We went to church every Sunday. We children went to Sunday school every Sunday. And a lot of my parents' friends were from the church. It was a Lutheran church that we attended. And it was a fairly typical childhood growing up in the 50s. And at the time, I was the youngest of 3 girls, and I was later followed by 2 boys. So I am the middle child in a family of 5, 2 older sisters, 2 younger brothers. So as I said, my journey really began, I would say, in my early teenage years. And that was around the time that we received in the church our formal education in the Lutheran faith. So I was being taught at that time by this minister who had come to the church, I guess about maybe 6 or 7 years earlier. He had initially come as the assistant pastor. We had two ministers. He came as the assistant. His name was Jack Hickman. And he very quickly endeared himself to a good many people in the congregation, especially young people. He liked to hang out with the teenagers, and kids always thought he was cool. He was Pastor Jack, or people called him PJ. So he was the one who was teaching the confirmation classes. And I, being a very logical person, that's why I was so good at math, found instantly that I had a lot of issues with some of the things that I was being taught in these classes. And again, not to denigrate the faith of anyone who is Christian and to whom these things are very important, but to me, I struggled with some of the things I was being taught. One, I had a problem with the idea that Jesus is half man and half God. That logically I couldn't wrap my head around that one. And logically I took issue with the fact that we were taught about a Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, but that was only one God. And to me, logically, I couldn't rationalize that any way, shape, or form. These are some of the most fundamental beliefs of the church. But I found that when I asked questions, I was not only discouraged from asking questions, but pretty much told that you don't ask questions, you just accept it on faith. That's the way it is. So, and I was told this by the pastor, I was told this by my parents. So things already by the time I was about 14, 15 were not sitting well with me. When I was 16, I went through with the confirmation, largely to please my parents. I mean, imagine those of you who have children, imagine if your son or daughter had come to you or came to you and said, listen, you know, I don't really think I want to have a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah because I don't believe in it. Imagine how you would feel if your child said that to you. So, so I went through with it largely to please my parents. At the same time, as I went through my high school years, I was a somewhat shy, awkward, naive kid in a lot of ways. And as time went on, I found myself feeling isolated, even though I had friends, feeling isolated, feeling lonely, and at the same time, still going to church. And now Pastor Jack was teaching, instead of just Lutheran doctrine, he was preaching a form of born-again Christianity. You have to accept Jesus to be saved, and if you accept Jesus, all of your troubles will be solved and everything will be wonderful. And this is what I was hearing week after week after week going to church. And he was gradually gaining quite a following, not only from the church, but also from beyond the church. And not just from Lutherans, from Lutherans, from other forms, from Protestants, from other Protestant churches, from Roman Catholics, and yes, I'm sorry to say, also from Jews. Over the course of the next, I'm going to say, well, I was involved for 11 years. So let me just say that at the outset. We peaked at somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 people that were involved in this from the New York metropolitan area. So, but I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. So when I became a senior in high school, I reached a point where things were not going well for me socially with my friends, where I was facing a lot of pressure about making a decision. Should I go to college? Should I not go to college? If I go to college, where should I go to college? Should I go away to school? Should I stay home? And consequently, because of all of this, I was vulnerable. I was susceptible. And at the same time that all of this was going on, a lot of my friends from school were getting involved with Hickman. And I still remember sitting in math class one day and my Jewish friend turned to me and she said, "What's going on down at your church?" And I said, "I don't know." She said, "How could you not know? It's your church." She became involved before I became involved. In any event, I reached a breaking point because of all of this stuff that was going on in my life, where I, quote unquote, accepted Jesus and became involved with this group. So at that time, it was essentially, as I said, a born again Christian group. But and with just one slight thing, there seemed to be an emphasis on the Jews in the group. We refer to them as Hebrew Christians, and they had like a special aura about them. I ultimately decided not to go away to college. I decided to stay home and go to Hofstra University, which was about a 15-minute drive from my parents' house, so that I could go there, go to classes, and I could still stay home and be involved with this group. I'm just gonna, 1 second, I'm gonna go close the blind because I'm getting a funny sunshine on my face. Hold on 1 second. Okay, that's better. All right. So, so when I started college, right in the very beginning of college, I started dating my husband, whom I had met at the very end of high school. We actually graduated high school together. My husband was raised in a Roman Catholic home, and we started dating. And I very quickly said to him, listen, I don't want to put too much pressure on you, but if you don't accept Jesus, I can't see you anymore. So not too much pressure. And of course, what else was he going to do? And so he got involved in this group as well. And for the next 4 years, our lives, our social lives, everything revolved around involvement in this group. Our friends, a lot of them went to Hofstra with us. And if they didn't, we knew them from the neighborhood and from the church. Everything in our lives revolved around this group. So as time went on, we started hearing more in this group about this guy, Jesus, whom some people started calling Yeshua. And we, of course, believed that he was the Messiah. But then Hickman started talking to us and telling us that, since Jesus was an observant Jew, which he was, and he lived his life Jewishly, and if we believe in Jesus, shouldn't we emulate Jesus' behavior? And so as time went on, hints of Judaism started to be introduced to our practice. The very first one that I can remember personally, and this took place at a camping trip. We used to go away camping for a week in the summertime. And those of you who are in Orange County, maybe you know it's just over the border in Connecticut, Kent, Connecticut. There was a camping grounds there that we used to go to for a week every summer. Now this is back in the early 70s. So this was long before the days of cell phones and things like that and computers, but people were told not to bring portable televisions, not to bring radios, not to look at a newspaper. And for a week, we were isolated there in these campgrounds. Nobody was there except us. Now, if that's not a scenario for brainwashing, I don't know what is. But so when we went away camping this one summer, I still remember that on Friday night, we had Shabbat dinner at the campgrounds. And I very clearly remember we lit the candles with the blessing. We did Kiddush and Motzi. And then we sat down to eat our dinner, which consisted largely of pork chops. And that is because that part hadn't been explained to us yet. We were taught about Friday night Shabbat dinner, but not the other stuff. And by the way, my last 2 years when I was at Hofstra, I had extra credits. I could take anything I wanted. I signed up for, inexplicably, Hebrew. And I took 4 semesters of college Hebrew. My teacher was a Sabra. He didn't quite know what to make out of me sitting there in class with this giant gold cross around my neck. But it was at that point that I first learned Hebrew, and I'm so glad that I did. My father scratched his head and asked me why I was taking Hebrew, and I said to him, Daddy, I don't know. All I know is I want to be able to read the Bible the way it was originally written. And that's all I could tell him. So I took 4 semesters, my last 4 semesters at Hofstra, I took Hebrew. So along the way, this group now, which had been, we had taken over 2 Lutheran churches in Nassau County, the one in Massapequa and another one in East Meadow, literally taken over because people from this group were officially joining the church so that they would have a vote and change things in the congregations. And also those who didn't want to be part of this group were gradually leaving and going to other churches because they were so unhappy with it. Excuse me. So the next thing that I can recall is within this group, there was a subgroup called the community or the family that Hickman announced at some point he was forming. Now, he, by the way, was not married. This group initially consisted of all the people in the group who were born Jews. And Hickman claimed that this was his family, that he was adopting them as his family. And they called him Abba. Now, within this group, and by the way, I'm sure most of you have picked up on the fact right now that what I'm describing to you is a cult. Many people told us that at the time, and we, of course, didn't believe it. But that's really what it was. And so when you're in that kind of a setting, and within there is a special group on the inside, those who are on the outside, you can imagine how that makes you feel. I wish I could be part of that, right? So of course, what happened, a year or so goes by, and membership in the community was opened up. You had to apply and go through an interview process in order to get into the community. Now, along the way, my husband and I had graduated from Hofstra, and we both were certified as teachers when we graduated in 1975. There were no teaching jobs on the island, on Long Island. So Hofstra suggested we go a little bit further south to find a teaching job. We did. We found teaching jobs in the state of Maryland. And we got married and we moved down there. We were there for 1 school year. We could have stayed longer, but while we were there, for the duration of the time that we were there, every other weekend we drove back to Long Island for the weekend because of our ties to this group. And before we came back to New York, we already had put in our application to the community. Okay, so what was involved within this community? It was called a family, but the structure of the community was very, very, very patriarchal. Underneath Abba, who was the head of this family, there were 12 men that were appointed by him, who were called elders. And everyone in the group was assigned to an elder. And we had to report to him. When we came to services, the elders would take attendance. If there were issues or concerns, the elders would bring them to us. If we had a major life decision to make, such as getting married or starting a job, or whatever, no major life decision could be made without consulting with your elder. And the elder sometimes would take it back to Abba and see what he thought about it. Underneath the elders, the next thing was the family unit. And within each family unit, the man of the household was called the priest of the household. He was in charge of the household. Women basically had to go along with what their husband said. If there was a single woman in the group, she would be assigned to a married man who would be her priest that she had to also consult for decisions. So this was the group. When one applied to be in the community, there are certain promises that you had to make. The biggest one of which was you had to promise that you were going to tithe 10% of your gross income to the community. And for those who had children in the school, they had to charge an additional 5% of their income to the community. And essentially, we were told that this was supposed to be for tzedakah and for doing good things in the world. Of course, later on, we found out otherwise, but again, I'll get to that. So we applied to the community, we were accepted into the community, we moved back to Long Island. The next thing that I remember being introduced Jewishly was a meeting was held in which two things were announced, two initiatives. The women were going to be taught how to kosher their kitchen and maintain a kosher home. The men simultaneously were going to be instructed on how to put on talit and tefillin. And that is exactly what happened. So I learned how to keep a kosher home, and I koshered my kitchen. And this is what we did. Now, there were along the way, there were some misconceptions which were taught to us. The largest of which was when we were taught about kashrut, we were taught that chicken is parov. And I used to make this great chicken parmesan dish, and I thought, wow, this is great. But this is what we were taught. Going on, and by the way, the teaching, the belief about Jesus, initially we thought that Jesus was, we believed in Jesus as the Messiah, just as most born-again Christians do. Then as time went on, we still believed that Jesus was the Messiah, but didn't necessarily believe in that he was a God, that he was just a man. Then ultimately people just believed he was a great prophet. And eventually, by the time we left, I think that, you could have asked 10 different people who were there what they believed about Jesus, and you would have gotten 10 different answers, because Jesus wasn't even talked about so much anymore. The thing was, at that point, we were hooked. We were involved. And now, it's a unique situation to be in, because regardless of what religious background we came from, we, for example, we couldn't go back to the church because we didn't believe in Christianity anymore. Nor could we go to a synagogue because we weren't Jews. We were living Jewishly, but we weren't Jews. And believe me, every synagogue on Long Island had their eyes on us. They knew about us, and they were watching us to make sure we were not proselytizing their congregations. But at the same time, we were told within the community, our contact with Jews was closely monitored. We were not supposed to be going to synagogues. We were not supposed to be having a lot of contact with Jews. Why? Because I think then we probably would have started to realize that maybe there was something wrong with what we were doing, that it wasn't normative Jewish practice. But that was the way it was. So, oh, and by the way, what was the explanation? Like I said, we had a bunch of people in the group who were born Jews. I would say the vast majority of them did not come from particularly religious backgrounds and did not have strong Jewish educations. Why is that important? Because sometimes when something was taught to us, like this thing about chicken being parov, even an uneducated Jew has enough sense to say, wait a minute, that's not the way I ever heard it. So whenever a question like that would come up about something that Abba taught us, Abba's answer to us always was this: we're Sephardic Jews. Now, I'm sure that everyone on the call today, there probably are some people here who are Sephardim, but most of the people there didn't know any Sephardic Jews. And a lot of Ashkenazic Jews growing up, what do they know about Sephardic Jews? they know Sephardic Jews are different. They have different customs and sometimes different beliefs. So this was his way out. Anytime he told us something that people questioned, he'd say, well, we're Sephardic, that's why we do things that way. Okay, so going on, the next major life event for me was my first pregnancy. And during the time that I was pregnant, the next thing that Abba introduced to us Jewishly were the laws of family purity and the laws of nidah. And they actually constructed 2 mikvahs in people's homes, and the women in the community were going to the mikvah. We were supposed to be in a class to learn about this, but because I was due to give birth very soon, they put our names further down the list, and then somehow we never got included in a class. But consequently, that meant that because we never were put in a class, I never ended up going to the mikveh, but that caused all kinds of problems for me emotionally, which I'll talk about as we go on. So my daughter was born. After she was born, we had a mock christening. And this was essentially to please our parents, both sets of parents. The christening was done not by Abba, but by the other minister there. His name was John Hovey. He was wearing a kippah when he did it. And as he poured the water over my daughter's head, instead of using the word baptized, he used the word mikvah. Our parents were just happy to see the water, placed on her head. We never got an official certificate of baptism, but that's what happened. Now, a word about what our services looked like. We had long ago given up the Christian prayer book, and we used a Sephardic siddur, and we were davening out of the siddur. The room was set up like a Sephardic synagogue. The chairs were in a semicircle, and one side of the room was for the women, one side of the room was for the men. In the front of the room on the eastern wall, we had an Aron Kodesh with the Sefer Torah, with the Shulchan in the middle. So our service kind of looked like a Jewish service. It didn't look like a Christian service. So as time went on, the one thing that saved me in all of this was that I was a little bit of a rebel, and I always liked to read and I liked to study. And so I did a lot of studying on my own. And as I studied on my own, I began to realize some of the holes in what we were being taught. Ultimately, we were taught our family history, and Abba claimed that he learned everything that he knew from his grandfather, and he traced the family history all the way back to the 1st century, to the time of the original church, and said this had been passed down from generation to generation, and we had a special mission in the world, and that someday there was going to be another Holocaust in this country, and we were going to be the ones to save the Jewish community. Outlandish, far-fetched. And yes, when I heard that was one thing I said, no, this is just too much for me to believe. But nevertheless, we stayed. We still stayed. A couple of years later, my son was born. And this was probably one of the most ridiculous things that I did. My son was born 5.5 weeks premature. He was discharged with me on the 3rd day because he was still over 5 pounds at that point, but his weight went down to, by the time he was 8 days old, his weight went down to about 4 pounds, 7 ounces. And I was told to go ahead with the bris anyway. Now, the bris, how did a bris happen? We certainly couldn't get a moil to come and do a bris for us. There was one gentleman in the congregation who was studying to be a physician's assistant. He did the physical circumcision while one of the elders read the blessings. And I went ahead with this with my tiny young son on the 8th day. And of course, we all know that in Judaism, that if a child is not well, you do not have the bris on the 8th day. You put it off until the child is strong enough. And looking back, that's probably one of the stupidest things that I did. Along the way, a number of my friends left. And anytime someone left, we were not supposed to have anything to do with them. We would have family meetings being told who was left and who had left and who we should avoid. And if anybody had done anything wrong, whatever that means, they had to get up and confess their sins in front of the group. Again, everything worked on the concept of guilt and shame. Like I said, I studied on my own. I was studying for my master's degree at Stony Brook. I took 4 courses with a wonderful teacher. The first course was on American Jewish fiction. The second one was on American Jewish history from colonial times to the present. The third one was on the history of anti-Semitism, and the fourth one was on the Holocaust. And by the time I took that 4th class, it was in the fall of 1981. My son was about a month old. He had been born in August. And I went to class with him in the stroller. And having an infant in the room while you're talking about the Holocaust had an extraordinary effect on everyone in the room. And it was as part of that class, when I read the book Night, that I came to a conclusion. I came to a decision that these people that I was reading about, I said to myself, these are my people. And whatever it takes, whatever it costs, I need to become a Jew. Shortly after that, there was a big blow up. Hickman was revealed as a fraud, and more than a fraud, it was revealed that all kinds of immoral behavior was taking place behind the scenes, including improper sexual encounters between him and teenage boys, and then improper sexual encounters between one of those young men who was now in his 20s and was the kindergarten teacher in the school, and invited the kindergarten boys to Abba's home for the weekend. And I don't need to say any more. All of this was revealed and more. And it was at that time we decided it was time to leave. So now what do we do? What do we do? Most people who left said, I can go shopping on Saturday and I can eat Chinese food. I can eat in any restaurant I want. And they were right. People could do whatever they want. But it was also very traumatic leaving a place. I mean, it was like the entire bottom fell out of our world. Everything we believed in, and we had been there for 11 years, everything we believed in, all of our friends, everything was now a sham. It had all fallen apart. And where do we go and what do we do? And so we looked at each other, my husband and I, and we said, well, we're not going to make any rash decisions. We're very vulnerable right now. What we actually did is we went to the local Judaica store and we bought a chumash and we bought a Havdalah set. And we continued to observe Shabbat in our own home. We did this about maybe a month and a half, 2 months, when I said to him, please let me call a rabbi. And I knew for me, the only brand of Judaism that made sense for me personally was conservative Judaism. I knew where the local conservative synagogue was. That was North Shore Jewish Center. It was about 7.5 miles away from where I was living. So I called up, I spoke with Rabbi Moshe Edelman, and I said to him that I was interested in a formal conversion to Judaism for a family of 4. He agreed to work with us. There were actually a few other people who had approached him as well. He worked with us over the next several months, and 2 days before Rosh Hashanah, in the fall of 1982, my daughter was 4, my son was 13 months old. We went to a beach on the North Shore of Long Island, which became our mikveh, and we became officially welcomed into the Jewish people. From that point on, we became very, very involved in North Shore Jewish Center. We were a little bit apprehensive, more than a little bit apprehensive at first, because we weren't sure how the congregation would look at us. And what we found was an extremely welcoming congregation. The congregation was huge at that point. We had about, I think, about 800 members, something like that, 800 family members. It was very large. The congregation was very welcoming. The women of the sisterhood very quickly got me involved in sisterhood, and I worked my way up through the sisterhood board to ultimately becoming the president of the sisterhood. I was involved in teaching Hebrew school, and of course my husband got involved in the men's club. And very early on, Rabbi Edelman asked me to tell our story at an event called Torathon. And that was the very, very first time that I told the story to a crowd that was standing room only. The congregation welcomed us with open arms, were very accepting of us. And I noticed when I was looking through and I see Moshe Edelman is on here. I also noticed in the beginning, looking through the names of the people who were on here, my machutin is on here. The first couple to invite us to their home for a Shabbat afternoon lunch are now our machutenistas. Their son, who is our cantor, happens to be married to our daughter. And they used to ride on the bus to Solomon Schechter together when they were little. So yeah, we sent our children to Solomon Schechter. We sent them to Ramah. I became very involved in synagogue life. After I finished my tenure as sisterhood president, I went on to become involved in the synagogue board. And I worked my way up to ultimately being the president of the synagogue. Along the way, I spent a total of 9 years, not consecutively, as the ritual chairman of the congregation, until recently was the only woman in the congregation to serve in that position. When we first came to North Shore, the synagogue was not egalitarian. It was at that time that there was a lot of pressure being put on the rabbi and the board to change things, to make it more egalitarian. We came in the midst of that. What was important about that was, after what I had been involved in, it was a breath of fresh air to me to realize that women can do things ritually. Women can be involved in the synagogue, and they don't need to rely on the men in their families and in the congregation, that women can participate equally. And one of the things I first learned to do was to read Torah. And that was done at the urging of Rabbi Edelman, even though the only place I could do that at that time was at the mincha service on Shabbat. There was no other time that I could do that. But still, I learned how to read Torah, a skill that I retain until this day. And I remember I was teaching Hebrew school, and we used to teach the kids how to daven the Shacharit service every Sunday morning. And the boys were told they had to have talis and tefillin. The girls were told they could put on tefillin, but they didn't have to. And I still recall very clearly one Sunday morning, Rabbi Edelman came in and was teaching the kids about tefillin. And he approached one of the girls and asked her a question. I don't remember what the question was, but she gave him exactly the answer that he wanted. And then he looked at her and he said to her, "And where are your tefillin?" And she looked at him like he was crazy. And at that moment, I said to myself, where are the role models? Why would any of these girls even think about putting on tefillin if they've never seen a woman do this? And 3 days later, I found myself in his office telling him that I had reached a decision. And my decision was that I was going to start putting on talit and tefillin. This was in the spring of 1987. It was not a time when a lot of women were doing this, except for the women who were in the rabbinical school. And JTS had only recently just started ordaining women. So that was 1987. A couple of years later, just before Rabbi Edelman left us to go to another synagogue, at a sisterhood installation, he had something personal to say to every woman at the table. He went around the table and said something for each of us. And when he got to me, he said to me, Margie, if I had my druthers, you wouldn't be here. Dramatic pause, and everybody went, oh, like, what a terrible thing to say. Then he went on to say, you wouldn't be here because you would be in Manhattan at the Jewish Theological Seminary in the rabbinical school, because that's where you belong. And now it was my turn to look at him like he was crazy. It was the spring of 1990. And I thought, me? Nah, no, that can't be, no. But that little kernel was there. And as I said, my involvement in the synagogue, I got involved and I did more and more and more, always did more for the synagogue, but yet it always felt like there was something more that I wanted to do, that I wanted to be able to share my love of Judaism with people. I wanted to be able to share, to be able to teach what I had learned. I really wanted to be able to do this. And so I wanted to go to rabbinical school. I didn't think it was something that was ever going to happen. We were a two-income family because our kids were going to Solomon Schechter Day School and Camp Ramah and USY pilgrimage, and then ultimately to college. So it was not something I could even consider pursuing as long as I was working. And then as retirement was looming on the horizon in 2014, which was the earliest I could retire without a penalty to my pension, then it started to become a reality. And in 2014, I did two things. In June, I retired from my teaching career. And just before I retired, a couple of months before, I actually finally put in my application to the seminary. Now, I must tell you that the interview did not go quite as well as I had hoped. Now, my friends at North Shore always used to tell me, oh, you're a shoo-in, they'd be lucky to have you, you're so great. You know, the interview didn't go quite as well as I would have wanted it to. You know, when you want something so bad, you try and make it happen. It just, so the result was that I was told that I was being accepted on a non-matriculated basis only, which meant I could take some of the classes, but not all of the classes. And I was not officially enrolled in the rabbinic program. I, of course, was devastated. I was embarrassed. And I told very few people about that status. I just told people that I had been accepted to study in the rabbinical school, which I was. And in September, I started studying in the seminary. So that September in 2014, I started studying at the seminary, and in that same month, I turned 61 years old. It's a 5-year program. For the next 5 years, I had a 5-hour round-trip daily commute on the Long Island Railroad and the New York subway system to get to JTS. I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning to get to JTS by 7:30 for Shacharit, and then didn't get home until 8:15 at night. Very long days. I was operating on little sleep and a lot of emotions. That first year was tough for me in a lot of ways. It was exciting to be able to finally be studying at JTS, but I was filled constantly with self-doubt. And my classmates were confused about my status. What do you mean you're not part of our class? You're in our classes. What? And I felt like I constantly had to explain myself. And my teacher, some of my Hebrew teachers rode me very hard with regards to my Hebrew. And it just seemed like it was never quite good enough for them. It was a very emotional year for me on a lot of fronts. And by December, I had reached pretty much a breaking point. And one day coming home on the train, I forgot my backpack on the train until the train pulled out of the station. And the backpack had in it my iPad with all of my notes and everything on it, and my talis and my tefillin. And at that point, I just lost it. And I said, that's it. I can't do this anymore. I can't. And it was my family members, particularly my daughter-in-law, who talked me down off of the ledge and said, no, look, you wanted this so much, so badly. You have to do it. You have to keep going. So I went back and I had to reapply that spring, and I did. And then I was accepted. So now, of course, I was told, well, it's going to be another 5 years because you're going to be with the class of 2020 now. And I said, no, 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 no. I intend to complete this in 5 years' time. And so I was part of the class of 2019. I was part of the class of 2020, but I was determined I was going to finish this in 5 years. Now, mind you, physically, this was a challenge for me also. During this time, I was told by a doctor I needed to have both of my knees replaced. I didn't want to do that until after I had graduated. So I had to resort to a rolling backpack because I couldn't carry my backpack on my back. But I was determined to do this in 5 years. I did. It was very exhilarating for me to be studying with people so much younger than me. My senior year at JT, and I did get caught up. Not only did I get caught up, I got in trouble with the dean for taking too many classes, because while I was there, I just wanted to take everything that I possibly could. And so in September of 2018, I started my senior year JTS, and the same month I received my Medicare card in the mail. I really was the only one, I joked, to literally give a senior sermon that year. And that year was the year that I was interim rabbi at Agudas Israel, along with Moshe Edelman. We shared the pulpit together, which was a wonderful experience. I loved being there, loved the congregation of Agudas Israel. I made a lot of friends there, and friends to this day. Was a wonderful experience. Absolutely, just a wonderful time when I was there. So yeah, I was ordained in 2019. I did have those 2 knee replacements. At this point in my life, I'm not looking for a full-time pulpit. I'm looking for part-time work. And so I have been working since April of this year as an educator for Women's League for Conservative Judaism, doing a lot of teaching, which is what I love to do. I've made a lot of friends, and I see a lot of you on here today. I've done life cycle events. I've done, unveilings, funerals, a bar mitzvah. And recently I had my first opportunity to do a conversion. And interestingly enough, when I needed to call on 2 colleagues to be the other 2 rabbis for the Beit Din, one of those was Moshe Edelman. So the rabbi who officiated my conversion was there when I officiated my first conversion. And then the next night I did the wedding for this young woman. So I've been keeping very busy. This is my life. I'm very happy to be in the rabbinate. It's been a long journey, but my love is Jewish education. What I love about Judaism is the fact that about being a conservative Jew is that I don't have to. I took this, my brain, and I had put it on the shelf for 11 years of my life. I don't have to do that anymore. Not only do I not have to do that, I'm encouraged to use my God-given intelligence. And I'm encouraged to ask questions, even the difficult questions. And I may not always like the answers that I get. I may not get an answer, but I can ask the question. And I can share with all of you what I have learned, and I can share with you my love for Judaism and for this religion, which has embraced us and been so accepting of us. So yeah, and both of my children have since married, as you heard at the beginning. They have given us grandchildren. My son and his wife my son met his wife on Nativ. They have two boys, the first of which, my oldest grandson, was born 10 years ago on the same date on the Hebrew calendar as the date that we went to the mikveh in 1982. How's that for a coincidence? And my daughter, she and her husband also have two boys. And I have, through my son-in-law, who was previously married, inherited two more grandchildren. So we have six in all, and that's a girl and a boy. So yeah, that is pretty much the story in a nutshell. I'm sure you have questions. I see there are some things in the chat, so why don't we open up the chat now, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, so I will open up the chat with some questions that I see. First of all, somebody wanted to know, what did you miss from, if anything, from Christianity when you decided to convert to Judaism?
I don't know if there's anything in particular that I missed. I know a lot of people wonder, did we miss Christmas?
Right, yeah.
Not really. I mean, from the time that we were involved in the community, we already weren't celebrating Christmas. Now, it is, I do have a unique situation in that Christmas Day also happens to be my sister's birthday. And for a long, long time, that was the one day of year that my whole family would get together.
Okay.
So I did get to celebrate it with my family, but no, I don't really miss it. Do I miss my pork chops? No. That's another question people want to know. The one food maybe that I missed, maybe shrimp, although I was told by a doctor a couple of years ago I'm actually allergic to shrimp. So there goes that anyway. I don't know if there's anything I really miss about Christianity, because I had so many problems with it from an early age. I don't really, yeah.
Okay. Then another question was, how did your family react to you being so involved with Pastor Hickman? And this is before any of these unfortunate revelations came out afterwards. Did they see that you were becoming like entrenched in a cult? Like, what did they see?
Yes. Yes, we were told by both sets of parents that, don't you see this is a cult? And of course we would say, no, 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 no. When you are entrenched in it, you can't see it. It just does not make sense to you. Because you have this special feeling of, being involved. Now my family, especially we heard from them, because after all, this grew out of the church that I grew up in, but my parents never embraced it. My parents eventually left to go to another Lutheran church when one Sunday morning, John Hovey, the other minister, got up and gave a sermon to the remaining Lutherans and basically said to them, look, if you don't want to be Jewish, get out. And this was a church they had belonged to for 25 years of their lives and devoted their lives to. Yeah. So it was hard for my family to accept. We're just talking about our involvement in the cult. Okay, because I know the other question is going to come later on.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was my, so the next question was, following that, how did your family react to you converting to Judaism after all of this?
Yes. Okay. So we had two sets of parents. My husband's parents were not religious Roman Catholics, but had a very strong belief that if you're born a Catholic, you die a Catholic. They never accepted it and never wanted to discuss it until the day they died. Although, I mean, they did not cut us off. They maintained contact with us. My parents, the first thing that happened was 6 months after the conversion, very unexpectedly, my father passed away from a massive heart attack. He was only 61 years old. I was devastated. I was ill prepared to deal with this. First of all, I was losing my father and I was only 28 years old. And I had to deal with the fact that they, as religious Christians, they were going to have a wake and communion at the funeral and all of that. And I felt like I should be sitting Shiva. It was a very, very, very difficult time for me. After that, it became very difficult for my mother. My mother was a very religious woman, and I could understand from her point of view that it would be difficult to accept that once I had believed in Jesus and now I didn't anymore. I know that was hard for her, but she would never give up contact with her children or her grandchildren. And eventually, as time went on, with a little bit of concessions here and there, compromise here and there, eventually my family came gradually to accept what is. And it was my sister who first started wrapping the kids' gifts in Hanukkah paper instead of Christmas paper. And on Easter, she would give them a bag and say to me very apologetically, "I'm sorry, it's not fancy like an Easter basket, but everything inside of it is kosher for Passover." And my children were thrilled with that. My mother, my family came to my daughter's bat mitzvah, came to my son's bar mitzvah. When my mother passed away in 2011, it was a very different situation. My siblings actually asked me if I would give her eulogy, and I did. And they also asked me if I were going to be sitting Shiva. And when I said yes, they said, "Can we come?"
Yeah.
And they did. Three of my four siblings were present the first night of Shiva. And the rabbi at that time, Rabbi Howard Hoffman, asked them to lead us in the 23rd Psalm in English. And the day that I was ordained in 2019, 3 of my siblings were in attendance when that happened.
That's really nice that they became so accepting. So another question I had is, when the church folded, did you know of any other Jewish families that did continue with their Jewish rituals, or did anybody else convert to Judaism?
Yes, when we approached Rabbi Edelman, it turns out there were a few other people who had also approached him.
Okay.
And I also know there were some people I heard of other people here and there in other synagogues in Nassau County that had pursued conversion. I know that the other people that were in the group with us eventually lost. One of them never went through with the conversion. There was another family that went through the conversion, were involved for a few years, and then they ended up getting divorced, and then we lost contact with them. So I don't know what happened to the others, but yeah, so there were a few. What I will say is, when the community broke up, most of the people who left there, of all faiths, Jewish, Christian, whatever, the vast majority of the people who left there never felt comfortable going back to any organized religion again, be it Christianity or Judaism. And to me, that's very sad. But I can understand. I mean, they felt, how could they trust anyone? But yeah, that's what happened to most people.
That's great. So then someone wanted to know, if the pastor was Lutheran, how come he was so gung-ho on Judaism? Is that because Jesus was a Jew? And then why do all the practices at the same time?
Yeah, the rationale that he gave us was that it was because Jesus was Jewish that we should be observing these things. As far as exactly why he did this, I'm not sure that anybody can ever answer that question. I mean, when everything was exposed in 1982, when we ended up leaving, and there was a big expose, a big article that was written in the Long Island Newsday about this, when everything was being exposed. And I forgot to show you my pictures. Let me answer this question, and then I'll bring up the pictures. There were a few people, a couple of the elders actually went. He was from the Midwest, I think, Hickman, someplace. And a couple of the people who were the elders who began to become suspicious went back and met with his mother and his sister and asked them about Jewish practice in the family. And the mother and the sister said, there are no Jews in our family. There is no Judaism in our family. This is, and they couldn't understand where he was getting this from. So why did he choose Judaism? I'm not sure exactly why, but like I said, we were in this in-between position. We couldn't go to the synagogue, we couldn't go to a church because we didn't fit in either one. But at the same time, it occurred to me that a lot of the Judaism he was teaching us, he learned from reading a book. And then he would forget things. And that's why we got some
mixed
skewed
messaging.
information sometimes, like that chicken is parov. Oh, and by the way, we also were told, this is even more laughable, because he had property up in Maine, which is where they all eventually ended up. He used to tell us that because the waters off the coast of Maine are cold, the lobsters from Maine were kosher. I never quite bought that one, but yeah,
That's
he
pretty
did tell
laughable.
us that. Okay, so while we're talking, let me bring up my pictures on the screen. I have a few pictures to show you. So ask the next question while I'm
Okay,
locating
so the
the
next
picture.
question was, and you talked about how your family reacted to your conversion to Judaism. How did your husband's extended family react to your conversion?
Well, first of all, his extended family is not nearly as large as mine. He has one brother
Okay.
who for a while was involved in this group with us. And he is still very close with his brother. But his brother also, my brother-in-law and sister-in-law are also very supportive and have come to came to the bar mitzvah, the bat mitzvah, the whole 9 yards. So yeah. But his parents were not happy at all, to say the least.
Right. And then someone had wanted to know if your husband had to be circumcised for the conversion, or they just
Okay.
just draw the drop of blood. I don't know. That's
yes. Both he and my son were already physically circumcised.
Right. Okay.
So they had the Hatafat Brit ceremony. That was the first thing that had to happen in the process. The moil came out on the night before we went to the mikveh, and we had the Hatafat Brit ceremony. And because there was one other family besides us that had the father and 2 boys, and there was another family where there was just the husband, another family where there was just a son. So altogether, I think there were 10 people that required the Hatafat Brit. So the moil joked that he had never had to give a group rate before. But yeah, he did. So yeah, so that was the first thing. So that was the night before.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So let me just share the pictures now, since I found them.
Okay.
Okay. So why are they? Oh, why is this? Okay. So here are the pictures over here. Can you see these? Let me. There we go. Okay. So this one here, this is when I was studying at Stony Brook University. Remember, I told you I took my son to the last class I took, the Holocaust class. And so here, and this is because I was nursing at the time. That's why the teacher said I could bring him to class. But it had a profound effect on everyone in the room to see an infant when you're talking about the Holocaust. So one night, there we are. I'm taking notes, and I've got him tucked under my arm. The photographer came in and couldn't resist taking the picture, and the picture showed up in the course bulletin for the next year. So this is the cover of the Newsday article that came out in 1982 with an artist's renditioning of Abba. This is a picture from inside that magazine. This is an actual picture of Abba, of Jack Hickman. There was nothing special about him in appearance. He was rather short. He walked with a limp. There was nothing charismatic about his appearance, but he could talk. And that's a lot of these guys that are cult leaders. They can, they talk and talk and talk, and they sound really, really intelligent. But, bottom line, they're giving you a lot of baloney. This is the building, the St. John's Lutheran Church that I grew up in, that we took over. This is an aerial view of the estate, the 2.5-acre estate that was bought for Abba with the money from the tithe that we all were paying. Yeah. This is from the inside of the article, this paragraph right here that I have circled. It says, at the North Shore Jewish Center in Port Jefferson, 8 Christians so affected by the Judaism they had learned, despite their disenchantment with its teacher, are taking classes in preparation for formal conversion to Judaism. 2 of those people were myself and my husband. We did not want to go on the record at the time. This was very new after we had left there. Everything was very raw for us emotionally. We did not want to be officially interviewed and have our names put in Newsday, but this is us in this paragraph. Yeah. This is a picture from my adult bat mitzvah in 1984. At that bat mitzvah, I gave a lengthy Dvar Torah on the Parsha, which was Chaye Sarah. And I'm guessing that maybe that is what Rabbi Edelman saw in me that made him think that I should go to rabbinical school. At any event, that was the first Dvar Torah I gave, and I kind of got the bug from there, I guess. This is the very first time I wrote to JTS. Here I circled, I still had the bulletin, 1988-89. The first time I wrote to them, I got the materials in the mail. And then after it, I said to myself, no, this is ridiculous. This is never going to happen. And I threw it in my desk drawer and forgot about it. Except I wrote to them again in 1989 and 2005. And this one is 2011. These were all before when I wrote to them in 2014. So clearly this is something I was thinking about for over 25 years before I actually acted on it. This is a picture of me from my semester in Jerusalem when I was actually in rabbinical school, 3rd year rabbinical school. This was taken at the spot called Robinson's Arch, where women can go and put on talit and tefillin without being disturbed, without having things thrown at you. And that is me touching the wall. It was a beautiful spot to daven. This is an article which appeared in your local newspaper when Rabbi Edelman and I came to Agudas Israel, announcing our arrival. And this is the program from ordination, is the outside of the program. And over here is my name. And next to each person was supposed to have a mentor who would be involved in the ceremony. I actually convinced JTS to allow me to have 2 mentors. One was Rabbi Edelman and the other is Aaron Benson, who is my current congregational rabbi and had been very instrumental in leading me through my internship. And these are pictures of those 2 gentlemen. This is Rabbi Benson. He placed the talit on me, and he's giving me a personal blessing right here. And then this is the actual moment of ordination over here. This is Rabbi Edelman. And the moment of ordination that includes the sponsoring rabbi actually placing laying on of hands, placing hands on the rabbi as they are ordained. So yeah, this was a very special moment for both of us. And this is me in my JTS talit. So those are the pictures. Okay, so
do we have time for a couple? This is what I was thinking of, but somebody actually wrote it. This will give you a laugh. What happened to the backpack that you left?
I had to contact Long Island Railroad.
Okay.
And they said to me it would be a few days before I could even get it back. And I would have to go to the Lost and Found in Manhattan. And I thought for sure, I called them, I was distraught. I described the backpack to them. I don't know how many times I called. And I said, it's got my iPad in it, and it's got my talis and my tefillin. And my son said to me, he said, Ma, nobody's going to be interested in the talis and tefillin. They're not even gonna know what they are. But I really thought for sure that the iPad was gone with all of my notes on it. I got the backpack when we finally got to go to the lost and found. Because I had called and I sounded so distraught, they recognized the backpack when they found it. My chargers and extra wires and things like that, those were all gone. Someone had taken those, but the iPad was still there, as were my tallis and filament.
Okay, I was wondering about that.
Yeah.
Then someone wanted to know about, I'm assuming that your conversion was a conservative conversion, or was it
Yes.
Orthodox? Okay.
No, it was conservative.
Okay, so your family is then, are you recognized though, going to Israel as far as being Jews?
Okay, that's a very interesting question, and it has something which has come up very recently in Israel. It's a big political issue.
Yeah.
But the law on the book says right now that a conversion that is performed outside the state of Israel is recognized for the law of return to move to the state of Israel. Now, having said that, they would also question if, like, let's say either of my children had decided to go to Israel and be
Right.
married in Israel,
Yeah.
then they would not have accepted it. They would not have accepted the conversion. As the same thing, if I had gone to Israel and if my husband and I had divorced and I wanted to get remarried, the same thing. And by the way, I was well aware of all of this when we converted. That that it's and also the fact that the Orthodox would not recognize the conversion. But my feeling was, and this was a value that I learned from my father. My father always hated a hypocrite. He hated hypocrisy. And I kind of share that. And I never felt that I should go through an Orthodox conversion to satisfy other people. Conservative Judaism is what's meaningful to me. So conservative conversion was the only thing that made sense to me. And people would say to me, well, what about your children? What if your children decide they want to marry Orthodox? And my answer to that always was, then that's my children's decision. If they decide that and they want to go through an Orthodox conversion, then they can do that. But I don't need to do it for that reason. And by the way, both of my children married conservative Jews.
Okay.
So that was not a problem.
And has your whole family been to Israel? I know you were there when you were in rabbinical school. Has your whole family been as well?
Yeah, well, both of my kids first went on a USY pilgrimage when they were in high school.
I did
Yes.
that. Yeah.
Yes. And then my daughter subsequently went to Israel 2 more times, I'm thinking, with friends. And then my son spent a year there. He went on the Nativ program when he graduated high school.
Okay.
And while he was there, my husband, myself, and my daughter all went to visit him. We were there for a few weeks. And I have been to Israel a total of 5 times. And the last 2 times that I was there, my husband joined me for part of that time.
Okay.
So now we're hoping to maybe plan a trip for the first grandson's bar mitzvah, which will be in 3 years.
That's
Hopefully
wonderful.
COVID will be done and we can go to
Yeah,
Israel.
really, you can go. And when somebody wants to know, which I thought was a great question, what is your Hebrew name and how did you choose it?
Okay, excellent question. My English name is Margaret Marie. And so Rabbi Edelman told us that we should choose our own names, choose names that, were meaningful to us. So I got a book of Hebrew names out of the library. And I looked, and the Hebrew name, or the English name Margaret means a pearl. So does the Hebrew name Margalit, which it was just a shoo-in, a perfect match.
Right.
So Margaret became Margalit. My middle name was another story. My middle name is Marie. Marie comes from, it's a variant of Mary, which comes from Mara, which is bitter. And even though that happens to be my daughter-in-law's name, she is Mara. I did not want to saddle myself with something associated with bitterness. So I tried to look for something different. And I looked through the book and I found a name which even Rabbi Edelman was surprised by. And I've never heard anyone else use this name, but the name is Moriel. Moriel means God is my teacher. And so Margaret Marie became Margalit Moriel, And so today I am Harav Margalit Moriel Bat Avraham Visara.
That's great. That's great. I know Sharon wanted to ask the questions.
Have you ever heard of the Academy for Jewish Religion?
Yes.
And is there any reason why you didn't go there?
Yes, because as I said, I have a strong connection to conservative Judaism, and that is why it was so important to me to go to JTS, to go to the Jewish Theological Seminary. I know a lot of people have gone to the academy,
Right,
particularly a lot of older students.
Right, second career rabbis.
Yes.
But it's my understanding that they teach any sect, reform or conservative.
Correct. And that is why, for me, JTS made more sense because I am so strongly committed to conservative Judaism. Yeah.
That's great. And then Ruth Pine wanted for me to tell you that her mom says hello, Honey Pine.
Yes.
Says hello.
Honey.
So I know there's some connections, so I had to like read that off the chat.
Yes.
And
yes.
I think that we got all of the questions, unless somebody else has something. I hope I was able to get through all of them on the chat. I think that I did. So
all right, if anybody has any further questions, I'd be happy to answer emails. My email address, Rabbi Cella, all one word, rabbicella@gmail.com. It's very simple. So if anybody wants to, if you think of something after we get off and you want to ask me a question, feel free to send me a question.
So I know,
Abby, there are a couple of hands raised if you want to take a couple more questions.
Oh, okay. Okay, let me just go through because I'm not in that view. Hold on, let me just go through.
We have Jill Ratner.
I thought Jill, she did want to know, okay. So Jill wanted to know, did you sit Shiva because for your parents because you wanted to or because of halakha?
I did it because
not too sure of the halakha on that.
Yeah. I did it because I felt it was something I needed to do for myself. When my father passed away very suddenly, I went to Rabbi Edelman and I said, "What do I do?" And he said to me, he said, "Look, you need to go and be with your family. You need to go to the wake, you need to go to the funeral, you need to be there with them." But he said to me, he said, "You also need to sit Shiva because you need that for yourself." He said, he said, "Your father was probably a wonderful man. I never knew him, but you're the one who's left behind to mourn. And you need this for yourself." And he was right. I did. I needed an outlet for myself Jewishly. So I did sit Shiva for the rest of the week, and I observed the yard site every year. And I also sat again once when my mother passed away, and my husband sat Shiva for both of his parents as well.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. And so somebody else want to know how much of a discussion, like how much do your kids know about what went on when you were basically like in the cult, so to speak? I mean, other than what they've read, I don't know how much you disclosed to them or, it's tough to digest.
Yes, when they were very young, we didn't share this with them.
Right. Yeah.
They knew that we were different from the rest of the family. But fortunately, they were too young to actually remember being in the cult. They knew that we were Jewish and nobody else was. But as time went on and I started telling my story to so many people and my kids were getting older, there was a point where somebody asked me that same question. And I said to myself, now, it's one thing to tell your kids that, we're Jewish and we weren't always Jewish. It's quite another thing to tell your kids, Mommy and Daddy used to be in a cult. But as my kids were getting older, I realized that since I was sharing this story with the rest of the world, I needed to share it with my children. They needed to know this. This is, and they should hear it from me before they hear it from someone else. And the end result was there were a number of USY programs that asked me to come and speak to the kids about the dangers of cults. And when my son was on Nativ, he called me up one day and he said, "Mom, we need another speaker for New Year's Eve. Rabbi Roth is going to be speaking, and then we needed someone else to speak after him. So I volunteered you. Is that okay?" So my kids are very comfortable with me talking about this now. Yeah.
Okay. So, and somebody else wanted to know how did you deal? Because it's always a struggle dealing with like family gatherings like on Shabbat, or even if like a holiday, like, it happened to fall out on Shabbat or something and you couldn't attend. How did your family react to all this, and how did, on both sides?
Yeah. We have been Shomer Shabbos for basically since the time we became Jewish. We even
Right.
bought a house around the corner from the
You
synagogue.
said that, yes.
Yes. But I do have to admit that prior to rabbinical school, if my family were getting together on a Saturday afternoon,
Mhm.
we would go, like I said, we had
Yeah.
to make certain compromises.
Right.
Since I started rabbinical school and since I am ordained, they know I do
Right.
not travel on Saturday. And they are very understanding of that, very accommodating of that fact. So,
Okay, great.
yeah.
Okay, great. And then I believe you said that your daughter was married to a cantor.
Yes, he is.
What,
Yes, she is.
is she? And then what about did your son marry anybody who's like, wait, any, it's something in the Judaism. I don't know how to.
No, she's an attorney.
Oh, okay. Just curious. Someone was
But
just curious. Somebody was just curious.
Yeah, no, he married a young woman from West Hartford, Connecticut, from Rabbi
Okay.
Jim Rosen's synagogue. That is where they were married, and her parents were very friendly with the Rosens. And actually, when my daughter was married December of my first year of rabbinical school, and when my son got up to make the toast, and my daughter is a physician, when my son got up to make the toast, he said to the crowd, he said, I don't know how many of you know this, my mother is studying to be a rabbi. So he says, now we have in the family a rabbi, a cantor, a doctor, and a lawyer.
Love it. That's great. Okay. So, and then somebody else wanted to know if you and your husband both moved on the path to Judaism at the same time. Were you like pretty much on the same page, or did one of you urge the other to go on that path?
I was probably the more determined of the two.
Mhm.
I tend to be a very headstrong personality, in case you haven't noticed that.
Yeah.
But when we were studying, when we had gone to Rabbi Edelman, I remember saying to him then, while I want very much for you to do this, I don't want you to do this because I want you to do this. If you do it, I want you to do it because you want to do it.
Mhm.
And really, for the balance of the time that we were studying with Rabbi Edelman, and over the summertime, he left us with books to read, and we never discussed the question. And then in September, when we ended up back in Rabbi Edelman's office that morning, and Rabbi Edelman said, okay, so now I need to ask you, do you still want to go through with this? We had not discussed it until that point. And neither one of us knew. I guess he probably figured out what my answer was going to be. But I didn't know for sure until that moment what his answer was going to be. But yes, so he decided, he said yes, that he wanted to do this as well.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. Hopefully we got all of the questions. And first of all, I just want to thank everybody for attending this program. I know I am totally blown away by your story, and I'm sure everybody else is as well. And I hope everybody was able to make some type of personal connection to this most fascinating story. For everyone who's on, please mark your calendars. Our next speaker is on Saturday evening. We do not have the exact time, February 6th. It's Nita Henyon. She has a fascinating story to tell as well. And there will be more details about that to follow. And just once again, Rabbi Cella, I just want to thank you. Thank you for all the conversations we had prior, but once again, just thank you for telling your remarkable story. And I think you have so much to offer. And I know this journey was hard for you, but boy, did you ever make it turn out in the end. So thank you.
Well, before
Thank
that
you.
February, we have an author event in January,
Thank
which
you,
I put
Sharon.
the information in the chat. That
Okay.
would be January 9th.
Okay. Thank you. Great.
Thank you, Rabbi Cella. It was wonderful. And we're so lucky to have you with Women's League.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Okay. I guess that's it.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Would you put the email in the chat?
Oh, my email? Yes,
Yeah.
I will do that.
Thank you.
Okay.
And I was just wondering, how did your husband and your children choose their Hebrew names?
Well, we chose the kids' names because they were so young. And he picked names that he likes. His name is Yosef Gavriel. My son is Benjamin Michael, so that was easy. My daughter is Jessica. Jessica became Hannah. Jessica Beth became Hannah Batya. And the kids, by the way, are not, they don't have Avraham and Sarah in their names. They have our names as their parents because we were converted moments before they were.
I love that. Great.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay,
great. Thank you.
all right.
Once again,
So
thank you,
if
everybody.
if you converted after they were born, but didn't name them until after you converted, would they still have to have Abraham and Sarah, or could they have your Hebrew names?
I mean, if they had converted before us, you mean?
No, if they were born but weren't
Yes.
named until after you were converted.
Right. They weren't converted until after we were
Right.
converted. We went into the mikveh first, and then he had to dunk the kids.
Oh, so of course they wouldn't have had Hebrew names before
Right,
that.
right.
Okay.
Right. Yes. Mhm.
Did you do that on purpose so that they could have then your Hebrew name be part of their Hebrew name?
I would imagine that was probably the rationale that Rabbi Edelman used. Yes, and also, I mean, they were minors, so this is a decision that parents can make for a minor. It's not something that they were able to make for themselves.
What will you do this year? Because your sister's birthday is on Christmas and Christmas is on Shabbat this year.
My sister, God bless her, said that she didn't want to celebrate on Christmas because of me. So she said, why don't we get together on Sunday? And she said to me, I want you to call a kosher caterer and order food.
That's so lovely.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Do you give talks on JTS? Because I get the emails, and there was a couple of, like for Hanukkah they had something, and I listened to a couple of the things that they had, and it was very good. So I don't know.
Yeah, I have not spoken at JTS other than, to my fellow students when I was there. But I also participate in a lot of the classes from JTS. I just love, the learning, and there's a lot of great stuff coming out of JTS. Yeah.
All right, so we're going to cut it off. I recorded up until this moment. So
Okay.
the questions that you just asked will still be there. So again, we thank everybody for coming, and I'll try to get the link out tomorrow because today is Sunday and somebody needs to rest. So, okay, thanks everybody.
All
Thank you.
right. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.